Yeah, we are very delighted to have one of our own here today, Luke Mayville. He is the co-founder and director of Reclaim Idaho, which is a grassroots organization that spearheaded Idaho's 2018 ballot initiative to expand Medicaid coverage to over 100,000 Idahoans. Most recently, Reclaim Idaho won a landmark case in the Idaho Supreme Court that enshrined the ballot initiative process as a fundamental right in the state of Idaho. Luke was listed by Idaho Business Review among the Power 25 leaders in Idaho's healthcare sector, and he received the 2019 Advocacy Award from the Idaho Academy of Family Physicians. And as he was telling us earlier, he also has just finished gathering signatures for a new ballot initiative in the education space. So welcome, Luke. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Cody, and thank you all so much for having me. I will jump right into things. What I want to do is just give you all a basic overview of the story of Reclaim Idaho. We've only been around for a few years. We started in 2017. I want to start with I'll start with the first chapter of which is our Medicaid expansion campaign, and then I think it'd be good to give you another short chapter, the lawsuit that Cody mentioned a moment ago, where we defended the initiative process from a really serious attack from the legislature, and then I'll end with both giving you a little bit of info on our most recent campaign for education, public school funding. Idaho is 50th out of 50 states in per student funding for public schools, and that's our new campaign. And I also want to just give you a little bit of a sense of one of the great causes of our organization, which is to leverage ballot initiatives as an organizing tool. Not just achieve one ballot initiative at a time, but really conceive of these campaigns as a way to get people organized and to build a statewide organization that has real power and influence in the politics of the state. So starting with Medicaid expansion, it really started small. It was a small group of friends at first, and then together with a group of maybe 20 to 30 volunteers in a small town in northern Idaho where I grew up. We had actually got started originally just as a short-term volunteer thing. I hadn't even moved back to Idaho yet, but I just visited to launch a grassroots campaign with a few friends for just like a 2 or 3 week campaign to pass a local school levy, which is a local property tax vote. In Idaho, all across the state, every 2 years, communities have to vote for sometimes up to a third of their entire school budget is like on the chopping block. And if they don't vote for it, it gets cut. And it looked like in the community that I grew up in, that was going to happen. There was a really organized opposition against the local school levy. So a few of us got together just to organize around that. And we weren't really organizers or all that politically engaged in any kind of professional way. We were all people who, in some ways, really loved politics and loved the idea of grassroots organizing. But I came at it from a strictly academic background, although I had volunteered in the past with some campaigns and things. And I also had worked in my Catholic parish as a volunteer organizer, but I didn't have all that much experience. But we just kind of threw everything we had at it. And we had some success. We won that local levy vote, and that gave us at least a basis to start organizing in that community. And you have to go back. It was in the winter, spring of 2017, which is just in the wake of the 2016 presidential election. And I think you all in one way or another will remember what that was like and just the kind of the enthusiasm in the air to get involved in something. And we were a real part of that. And we could see all around us that even in Idaho, all across the state, there was enthusiasm. Right around that time, there had been women's marches that had popped up, not just in the main city of Boise, but in small towns all across Idaho. And it seemed like to us, there's just a lot of potential out there, but it's not really being captured in any way and directed in any strategic way towards one big cause. That coupled with the success we had on that local campaign gave us the idea that we really want to we don't really know what it's going to look like yet, but we want to try to throw ourselves into something for statewide for 2018 and really channel a lot of this enthusiasm. And one way we thought of it is, what if we could build something like we built with that little local campaign? If we could multiply that like 30 times or 50 times across the whole state and get 30 or more local campaigns working all together at once on one common cause. Once we started thinking along those lines, that was the genesis of launching organization Reclaim Idaho. And we started thinking about what one big thing we could organize around. And we settled on Medicaid expansion. And the basic idea was that this is an issue that already has something of a constituency in every community, because there are people who have been left out in what's called the Medicaid gap. And I could answer questions if you're not familiar with that. But at the time, it was thought that 78,000 people had fallen into this gap where they're not able to get health care because Idaho had failed to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act. So we decided to launch an organization. At first, we didn't feel confident we could launch a ballot initiative because we weren't even from the main population center of the state. Before we launched the campaign, I had never even been to Boise. I left. I grew up in North Idaho, and then went off to college. I was in college in Oregon. Then I was eventually on the East Coast. But I'd skipped over the part of the state where most of the people live, actually. So we had no real statewide network. So the first thing we did was something like an organizing tour, where we, and this was probably, in retrospect, maybe our most successful tactic that we ever deployed. We called it the Medicaid Mobile. So we took an old camper that my two friends who ended up being the co-founders of Reclaim Idaho with me, a married couple, Emily and Garrett Strizich, they owned an old $1,500 1978 Dodge Tioga, I think it's called, an old C-Class camper. We took that camper and we spray painted it bright green, and we put the slogan Medicaid for Idaho across the side of it. And we just started driving it from town to town for about 25 days. We did a statewide tour of about 20 different towns. And we started just doing organizing meetings and using the camper as a kind of spectacle that could draw people in. And we built a statewide network to the point where by the end of that tour, we really felt like we had what it took to launch a ballot initiative. I can come back to this. I'll come back to this in a moment, but a key part of our entire strategy that worked then and that has worked since then is that we've really dug into the idea of distributed organizing, where you do organizing meetings in communities and you recruit volunteers, but along the way, you really challenge people to take on leadership. And you have designated, in most cases, it's counties but in some cases it's communities within counties where each locality has a local volunteer leader working with a local volunteer team. And that's what we were able to build that gave us the confidence to launch a ballot initiative. I'll skip over a big part of the rest of that story just to say that, and I could fill in gaps if people have questions, but by the end of the when Medicaid expansion eventually got on the ballot, came to a vote, one of our greatest successes is that we didn't just win, we won with 61% of the vote, which was much higher than any Medicaid expansion has ever got on the ballot in other states. There in Maine, it came close to that, I think at 58%. But all the other red states, it's closer to 50%, or in one case, it failed. So we won by a really large margin, but even more importantly, we won the vast majority of counties. We actually won the majority of the vote in 35 out of 44 counties, which is basically unheard of for initiatives like that. The typical progressive ballot initiative in a red state gets over the finish line by ratcheting up the vote in the urban, suburban centers, and then maybe just stopping the bleeding in the rural counties, and maybe getting 30 to 40%. Instead, we won in 35 out of 44 counties, and we didn't fall below 40% in a single county. So that something that's really important for our entire story, and what we really believe, is that we were able to do that because of our distributed organizing model, where we really do take pride in spending a lot of time organizing local communities, including in tiny towns at times, and in some of the most rural counties in the state. I spent a lot of time on that part, so I'll be really quick on our lawsuit. As soon as we successfully use the ballot initiative process in Idaho, a whole lot of powerful legislators and special interest groups and lobby organizations lashed out against our win by not just by trying to attack Medicaid expansion, but by attacking the initiative process and trying to basically kill the initiative process by making it so difficult to get future initiatives on the ballot that no one would be able to do it. In 2019, immediately after our victory, they put forward a really extreme bill that would have completely killed the process. We then launched a veto campaign we just skipped the legislature because we had no hope in them. And we just appealed straight to the governor, and we changed the motto on our green camper to a veto message. And when we drove around and organized around that, the governor actually vetoed it, which was incredible. And but then the legislature came back with a vengeance more recently, and they passed another bill that was just as bad. It required the current initiative rules are that some of the hardest in the country already, where you have to get a really large number of signatures, and then you also have to get a large number of signatures from 18 different legislative districts around the state. And that's about half of the districts. This new bill that they recently passed moved it from 18 districts to every single district. So that means that all an opposition campaign would have to do is kill a signature drive in one district, and they veto the whole thing. So we immediately filed a lawsuit because this time the legislature passed it and the governor signed it. We immediately filed a lawsuit. We won. We got a unanimous ruling by the Idaho Supreme Court that declared the new law unconstitutional, and that for the first time in Idaho history, clarified that the initiative process is a fundamental right. So as I like to say, especially when I'm on like, conservative talk radio or something like that, I'll say, the initiative, what the court ruled is that the initiative process is something like the Second Amendment. It's a constitutional right that cannot be infringed upon. And that's what the court ruled, or, it's something like freedom of speech. It cannot be infringed upon. And that was an enormous victory. The day the governor signed that bill into law, we declared that we were going to file a lawsuit. That day, we received over 1,000 small donations in 24 hours. And that was even before we won. So it just created this enormous momentum for our organization, and it gained us a lot of goodwill. I went on conservative radio programs, and 75% of the callers who would call in were on our side. And then even sometimes the hosts were on our side, because it just became this people standing up for democracy, but even more so just standing up for, the citizen having a voice, and the legislature is trying to take the voice away from the citizen. Last thing I'll just say is we pivoted immediately after winning that case. In fact, we had already started another initiative while we were fighting that case. But we pivoted towards saying, okay, now that we've secured the initiative process, it's time to really use it. And we launched another big ballot initiative. And this one is to do something about Idaho being 50th out of 50 states in funding for public schools. So what this initiative would do is it would increase funding for public education by over $300 million a year, which in Idaho would be about a 15% increase in the public education budget. And it would be paid for in two basic ways. One, by restoring the corporate income tax rate to what it used to be in Idaho. The other would be adding an individual income tax just on the amount that an individual makes over their first $250,000 in a year, or for a married couple, $500,000 in a year. And that money, the new money, would go towards things like making teacher salaries more competitive with neighboring states, enabling districts to pay support staff something more than $11 or $12 an hour, providing more stable funding. Then this is maybe the most popular part of the initiative in a lot of rural communities, but providing more stable funding for things like career technical training, like welding, carpentry, ag science, and also arts and music and special education. A lot of rural districts have just completely lost art as a thing. It's not the idea of a working class kid being able to have an art teacher isn't really a thing anymore in a lot of communities. And that might not be the most popular part of our message, but it's definitely something that motivates me. So that's what we're doing. 3 days ago, we submitted the signatures for this initiative, which is called the Quality Education Act, and we enough signatures to put it on the ballot. So we're really excited about that. We're now just kind of in the rebuilding mode of building towards the vote yes phase of the campaign, because the Quality Education Act, it will likely be Proposition 1 in Idaho, and it will very likely be on the ballot for the November general election. We've, in the big picture, as I mentioned right when I first started, mentioned a few minutes ago, we've conceived of our work as an organization as, waging and winning these ballot initiative campaigns, but along the way, we've really evolved towards thinking of these campaigns not only as an end in themselves, but also as a means to a larger end, which is to organize the state and build a powerful network of volunteers and local leaders, and along the way also build a stronger staff, central staff, and we've really focused in on the idea of what is it when we talk about what does it mean to build an organization. The central idea is engagement. We've laid out an entire ladder of engagement, all the way from the very bottom rung where someone is just barely informed about what our agenda is, all the way to the top of the ladder, which is taking on leadership in your community for the Quality Education Act or some other cause. And what we always want to do with these, and we want to win these initiatives, but we also want to wage these campaigns in such a way that we're developing leaders, that we're moving people from someone who maybe in the past has donated to a campaign to someone who's out in the community trying to persuade their neighbors about the need for more education funding or healthcare coverage or what have you, with the end goal of just having thousands more people engaged directly in the process and specifically engaged around these issues, like healthcare coverage, like education funding. And if I had to throw out a kind of umbrella concept of what these issues are, what we've generally said is we want in Idaho where government actually works for everyone and not just those with the most money and influence. So that's what Reclaim Idaho's been all about. I'd love to answer any questions or give any clarifications about what we've done or what we're about.
Thank you so much, Luke. That was so inspiring. I live in Eastern Washington, right across the border, south of Spokane. So it's exciting to hear all the exciting work that you're doing there. Yeah, I'll just, like you said, love to open up for questions. I had one question just to start us off, if that's okay. You kind of mentioned the grassroots feel and the organizing approach that you took with the first campaign. How are you thinking about continuing that kind of organic grassroots feel of the campaign as it becomes a more perennial organizing effort in this year, with the campaign you're working on?
It's one of the great challenges is to maintain the kind of enthusiastic, maintain the sense of enthusiasm and engagement that comes with a more frantic campaign when you're also trying to build an organization that has longevity and that continues on year round. I think maybe our most important strategy for achieving that is that even though we're building a long-term organization, we try to make sure we always have at least one campaign going on, meaning that there's at least one kind of big fight that we're taking on that has a clear timeline attached to it. And there's a clear moment where you either win or lose. And maybe there's a bunch of intermediary stages along the way where there's, kind of decisive moments that you can build up to. Because what we found is that if there's a big lull in between where there's nothing to really organize around, it's very difficult to just try to keep people organized and engaged when there's not anything immediately at stake. So with that in mind, we've had gaps of time where we did where we didn't have much of a thing. And in those gaps, our organization really dwindled quite a lot. And then we'd really have to reactivate people again and sometimes it would be like a combination of some of the people who had been engaged in the past, but also completely new people. But yeah, I would say that's been a really important principle. You always have to have short-term campaigns active, even as you're building a longer-term perennial organization.
I've got a quick question. After the Supreme Court decision, how has the political establishment reacted to that in the aftermath? Have they kind of backed off, or are they still looking for ways to chip away at this?
I think the immediate reaction was embarrassment, but because they were like shying away from interviews and dodging and just not wanting to talk about it. The really amazing thing, and I don't need to get deep into legal things here, but what's really amazing about the ruling, I mentioned that the court declared the initiative process a fundamental right. That's very meaningful. That's not just kind of rhetoric, because that would be nice, like if the court just gave us some really nice kind of rhetoric that we could use. But it's much deeper than that, because what they established is that it's a fundamental right, and therefore strict scrutiny must be applied by the court to any attempt to infringe upon that right. Basically, what that means, at least in the context of Idaho, is that if any law gets passed that in any way restricts the ballot initiative process, the court then has to apply a standard where they have to say there must be a public interest, a clear public interest behind this. It can't just be a policy preference. It has to be a clear public interest of why this restriction was necessary. And number two, the remedy that the legislature provided has to be like narrowly tailored to meet that public interest. So it can't just be a really broad change. So what that basically means, all of the legal analysis that I've seen agrees with this. They pretty much can't do anything to it without it just getting struck down. And if anything, that's great for us, because if they do something to it, it probably we'll just get it struck down again, and we'll raise a bunch of money, and we'll fire people up. So it's like a great fight to have, actually, because they're just like setting themselves up for failure. So we feel really confident about that, and it is nice to see, though, all that said, that they pretty much have backed off. So
that's great.
I'm noticing Cynthia and Erica. Maybe Cynthia, why don't you jump in?
Hi, Luke. So great to hear about the work you guys are doing. So just to clarify first, and then my question. So you guys started late 2016, early 2017, is that?
Yeah, pretty much like May of 2017.
Okay, so again, like that post the awful, horrific
Right.
November 2016 election. So I guess my question is, it sounds like you guys organize around initiatives. So we want to stop this or get this passed. How are you, I guess maybe two questions. One, are you engaging a lot of younger people because it's more of a quick hit kind of thing? And then two, how do you train people to do this work? And then I guess I hate to ask a three-parter. Are there other things you all are doing with those volunteers outside of like advocating for or against these ballot initiatives?
Yeah. So I'll just take those one at a time. It's been, I would say, in all of my experience with any kind of organizing, it's sort of a constant that it's much easier to get retired people involved. That's pretty much a constant, and it's so you do have to work extra hard to get people involved, whether they're students or people with like full-time jobs. or people who are like actively parenting, for example. And so we definitely, our base of volunteers definitely tilts towards older people, but we have really tried. So like in the kind of like distributed organizing model that I talked about, we had a Reclaim Idaho students group that formed mostly in the Boise area, and they ended up being pretty active. Like on our website right now, you can go to we have a signature tracker where we have like all the signatures that were collected, and then we broke it down by teams, and you can see there's like a Reclaim Idaho students, and they collected like maybe about 1,000 signatures or something. So that's one, but we have also had success, I would say, probably more so in the more urban parts of the state, in getting like, say, people in their 20s and 30s involved, especially in the main, more metropolitan area, the Boise area is where you get quite a few more people like in their 20s and 30s involved. But that's a constant challenge, I would say, of how do you draw in the younger demographic. And I would love to hear any ideas about that. But let's see, another part of your question, how do you train people? That's a really critical thing. So when we're at the early stages of a campaign, and we've gotten better at this, and like with Medicaid expansion, it was a little more chaotic because we were kind of like building the ship at sea, sort of. This last time around, we did a lot more to have like organizing and training types of meetings where we always like to have an action in every meeting. So we always like to have it end with actually like going out and knocking doors or going out to an event. We never like to just kind of end with training, but earlier on in a campaign, we like to take an hour to get people trained, for example, with the technologies that we're using, like the different voter file applications and things, and then also get people really practicing the talking about the issue, and having people try out their persuasion on one another when it comes to talking about funding for education or these tax proposals as a way to pay for it. So we do organizing meetings. A critical part of it is that we try to make it eventful. So we'll like, instead of just saying like, we're going to go to this town and have an organizing meeting, we'll try to pick like 3 or 4 towns in that region where we're going to have organizing meetings like over a weekend. And then we'll call it a tour. And then we'll also we'll put out a press release and hopefully get media to show up to it, and maybe do an op-ed about it or something. So just to create this sense that like this is happening. That's always been and I think that's been an important part of our rural strategy, is this idea that we're kind of like we have a tour vehicle. We're on the move, we're on the road, and there's this kind of visibility to what we're doing. And we're not afraid to be out in public advocating for these things. After all, we have a bright green vehicle where like you can't miss us. So anyway, but that's part of it. We like to actually do like training organizing meetings. And then then the last part of your question was like, do we challenge or do we challenge people or ask people to engage in other things other than initiatives? Certainly, I would say so far, we've engaged a lot of people in something like grassroots lobbying. So when we passed Medicaid expansion, we then engaged our network to speak out, to write letters to the editor. A really powerful one was when we challenged people to actually like try to arrange a sit down meeting with their local legislator, like in their rural district. That, because oftentimes like legislators don't even get people asking them to do that. And if there's like 15 people who want to meet with them and like they're like, hey, give me a date, let's meet at this cafe, we really want to talk to you about how you're thinking about the Medicaid expansion. Or getting a lot of, if that legislator's holding a town hall, mobilizing people to show up to it and asking a really pointed question about how they're going to vote on Medicaid expansion or what have you. We did something similar when it came to protecting the initiative process. And we're definitely going to end up doing something similar when it comes, because if we pass this education initiative, we anticipate a whole lot of legislators are just going to want to repeal it. So we're going to have to really engage in that lobbying effort. The last thing I'll say about this, though, is that when we've talked about our like overarching mission, we do want people, to really gain, you know, skills and confidence and a sense of community with like-minded people. And by doing that, we want them to become more powerful advocates in their own communities. And we want them to then be able to branch out and do other things that have nothing to do with Reclaim Idaho. And that's part of our long-term vision, is we just want there to be, we want this to be a state where just all over the place there are these strong advocates who can then jump in when there's some other thing, whether it's sometimes it'll be someone running in a partisan election. And we've seen quite a bit of that, actually. And I could speak more to that, but there's been some success there where the same people who got a lot of their, like really built up their capacity as advocates and leaders, then turn towards, you know, working to get people elected. So that's been important. Erica, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, you talked about how you did a lot of focus in organizing or outreach to voters in the rural counties. So how did you apportion your resources as far as the like rural versus suburban or urban? Like, were you largely taking for granted that there were certain parts of the state that were just going to overwhelmingly vote your way, or, you know, or did you have to do kind of that classic base mobilization in addition to like the persuasion outreach in the rural areas?
That's a really critical question. I think it was a really important tension when we did the Medicaid expansion campaign, where, like, you know, I mean, this is just how the kind of chips fell, but I found myself, like me personally, my tendency was really to want to just get out geographically all over the state. And then, but there were some other people in our organization being like, come on, you know, a third of the entire state lives in this one county. Let's spend a little bit more time. Like if we don't get enough of them to vote, like we're not going to win. So that's a real challenge. That's always going to be a tension, I think. And I would say overall, there's a lot more kind of gravitational forces pulling a statewide organization towards the main urban areas, just because it's, in terms of just the efficient deployment of whatever resources you have, it's easy to make a case that you can win more votes by doing that. But we are committed to being truly statewide. It's fundamental. In our case, it's kind of like on principle, but it is ultimately fundamental if you want your victories to endure, because it's way easier to be delegitimized if all these legislators from all over the state in all these rural communities can legitimately claim that this is an organization that's just based in Boise and just doesn't really get out very much. But if they, on the other hand, if they claim that, and then we just have overwhelming evidence to the contrary, that there are actually people in their own backyard who are like showing up and speaking on the radio and things, then it's a whole different story. So I think just one last point here is like one little like tool that we've sometimes used is we'll like say if we're challenging ourselves at like there was one point in this recent campaign where we were first building up our signature drive, and we were saying, okay, we're going to hold organizing meetings all over the state. We're scheduling these in all these different communities, and now we're going to put them out like a month out on the calendar, at least maybe 2 months out. And in the meantime, we're going to mobilize people to attend those meetings. And we would set big goals for ourselves, and we would say like, okay, 200 people in Ada County, which is the Boise County, at least 100 people outside of Ada. Like within the next week, we're going to mobilize that. We're going to get that many signups. That's been a nice little device for us to always say like, okay, we're going to get this many from the urban area and this many from the other area, and like kind of hold ourselves accountable to not just have a heavily lopsided mobilization. So.
I know we're almost at time. Luke, I have 2 questions. I don't know how quickly you can answer them. And if we go over a little bit, I think it's okay. One is it kind of based on some of a little of what Erica put in the chat, which is, do you worry at all about the right, using this now enshrined in your Constitution right, to put really dreadful things for public vote? So that's one question. If you are worried about it, is there anything you can do about it? The second is, when you talked about being on a lot of talk radio, and oftentimes callers agreed, and sometimes even the hosts, and that's really great. Did you have a strategy, or are you developing a strategy where part of your larger goal beyond the particular issue is to make a dent in the divide? In other words, are you trying to bring people together across these huge ideological gulfs that we have by how you canvass, by how you present issues, by the issues you select? I mean, so those are 2 really different questions. And
yeah, to that last question, I would say absolutely. And that's been, I didn't spend any time talking about that. But I did mention that, you know, one kind of umbrella idea for the issues that we work on is this notion that we want a government that really works for everyone and not just those with the most money and political influence. That's a concept that we've conceived of that we do think has really broad appeal. And I know that we're not the first people to use that kind of language, but it has very broad appeal, and we're explicitly we're not using any kind of label that people automatically assign in some negative value to it, and unless they're maybe just like sort of elitist or something, which there are certainly people in that vein. But so we've also, like, under that same umbrella, we thought in terms like, okay, we're working on bread and butter issues that affect the day-to-day quality of life of people. And we've talked about, you know, like, these are consensus issues where, you know, it's not that everyone agrees on them already necessarily, but at the very least, there is a large majority that is persuadable, and that we have a lot of evidence that there's a large majority that's persuadable. So we are steering away from issues that we think are more deeply divisive, and there's a cost to that, right? Because sometimes deeply divisive issues are also really important issues, and that's been a challenge, because there'll be things that I personally would like to see more progress on, or that other people in our organization that want to see more progress on, that as an organization, we just don't really feel it's very strategic for us to take on.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And we could have a long conversation about what that means right now in this moment with Roe v. Wade, and it's a huge challenge. But anyway, the answer to your question is absolutely. We have tried to. It's a very common refrain of ours that we're actually cutting against. We're cutting against the toxic, divisive aspects of politics that so many people don't like, and instead, we're actually presenting ourselves as these sort of happy warriors that are bringing people together, and we're this kind of we're a model of a grassroots group that welcomes everyone who believes that our kids deserve a quality education, and that no one should go deeply into debt when they get sick. And so we have a very positive, unifying ethos underlying what we do. I'm now actually forgetting, what was the very first thing you mentioned?
Do you worry about the extreme right
Yeah.
using this process?
Well, in some ways, that's a more relevant question, I think, especially for like when you think about it nationally, because the opportunity for the right seems to be more so in blue states or kind of purple states, where there's something that they cannot get through the legislature. In deep red states, it's not much of an issue because the right can get anything they want through. And I mean, they can at least get it. They can at least get it like a long ways of the way through the process. And in any case, if they can't get something through, the sure path for them is to get more of their tribe elected, and it would just be a real uphill battle for them to like try to get something on the ballot instead. So that's what we found. So we're not seeing any activity like that, and meanwhile, the initiative process is an absolutely essential tool if you want to see progress on the very issues that we were just now talking about, the issues that actually have potential support from the vast majority of the population, but they don't align with the ideology and interests of the Republican establishment. And that's a lot of issues, and that's part of the promise of the initiative process in rural America, red state America, is that it's really one of the only avenues that you can really put together like competitive statewide campaigns and make progress on these critical issues. But that's so overall, I'm not terribly fearful, and even if the right did use the initiative process, in my mind, it wouldn't be any scarier than the way they're just using the legislative process.
Makes sense.
Fair
Might
enough.
just jump in and wrap things up, if that's okay. Thank you, Luke, so much for that incredible presentation. I'm really just inspired by the work you're doing. I think I'll pass over to Erica real quick to just mention our event in June. But then we can do like a round of applause for you at the end, Luke.
Sure. So for our June briefing, we're going to have Matthew, I forget his last name, from a group called We Make the Future, who are the folks who are really innovating around how to use the race class narrative in our campaigning. And this is like the race class narrative comes out of the research around like how effective GOP dog whistle messaging is, and how you can't just let that stand out there. You have to have something else that we're saying that's more positive. So we're going to kind of get an intro to how that race class narrative can work in our favor in June.
All right, perfect. Well, yeah, everyone, well, thank you so much again, Luke. Yeah, well, we can unmute and give you a clap.
It was
Thanks.
excellent, Luke. Thank you.
Glad to have you involved in Ruby, and yeah, and good luck with this new campaign.